Hartmut Rosa est un professeur de sociologie et de philosophie à l'Université Schiller de Jena en Allemagne. Il a eu des livres traduits en français. Sa problématique concerne la critique sociologique du temps dans un moment d'accélération et de ce qu'il appelle une modernité tardive. Et c'est un concept qu'il va préciser avec vous. Et donc, le thème, c'est la résonance entre notre vie quotidienne et l'accélération du temps que vous constatez régulièrement. Donc, je vous présente donc Hartmut Rosa, professeur. Où est-ce qu'il est, Hartmut?
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup à vous. Merci. J'ai les casquettes, oui. Ok, merci beaucoup à Hervé Fischer pour cette introduction et merci pour l'invitation à la Cité des sciences et de l'industrie. Je crois que c'est la deuxième fois que je suis ici, mais quand même, mon français n'est pas assez bien pour donner la conférence en français. Je suis désolé pour ça. So now I have to turn to English. I'm truly sorry for this. I'm working on my French, but it's just not good enough. I always miss the words. All right. So what I want to talk to you about is resonance and alienation as two forms, two ways of experiencing time in our lives, in particular, and in our age. And I believe that there is one way, of course, the alienation part is a problematic way of being in time, which is a quote from Heidegger, so to speak. And then I ask, what would be a better way? And I believe we do have experiences of a proper way of being in time, and that's what I call resonance. Okay, so I want to move in four steps. The first is that I want to present to you the three levels of our experience of time, and then I will point out to you what my analysis of modern society is and why this is something that creates problems in our experience of time and for our experience of time. And the main problem is that we are constantly in a mode of aggression, I believe, of aggression towards life, towards the world, and also towards time. And then I will turn to what I consider the solution, right? A better way of being in time, what I call the resonance conception. So basically, when I ask you, what is your time, or what do you consider as being your time? What is my time, right, is the starting question. And then I would say, well, there are three possible answers. And these answers constitute three levels of consciousness, of temporal or of temporal consciousness. So the first thing is the everyday sense of time. So, for example, I would say, don't waste my time. I have to get the bus, for example, catch the bus. Or, in half an hour the conference starts, so I have to be there on time. Or, at 7 the shop closes, right? So this is normally the dominant mode of our temporal experiences. It's the temporality of our everyday life. And that's when you struggle with the to-do list. I have to get this done by that time and something else done by another time. But if I ask you, what is your time, right, you might give a different answer, right? Not the temporality of the bus coming in 5 minutes or so, but you would say, you know, my time, that is the time of my life. This is the 70 or 80, or if you're happy, the 90 years you might have. It's the time span between birth and death. So that's your time, the time of your life, right? That's a biographical perspective. And then you would say, you know, in the time of my youth or of my childhood or in the time of my working age, or you will say, well, one time I will retire and that will be a different life or so. So that is also a temporal perspective, which normally it's not in the foreground of our consciousness, but it's still important and it's always there. And if I ask you, what is your time? You might give a third answer, a different answer yet again. And this is when you say, well, my time, that's the 21st century. It's the digital age, right? It's the time of, I don't know, maybe Donald Trump or the Brexit crisis or something like this, right? So then your time is a certain age or a certain epoch. You might also say at the time of Einstein, right? Or yesterday I heard a talk here. By the way, I really like this conference, right? Bringing together the temporal experience and concepts of the arts with the social sciences and philosophy, but also with physics, right? I find this fascinating, right? And yesterday, for example, there was this talk on the time of Marcel Proust, right? The early 20th century, right? The age of, but you could also say the age of Jean-Jacques Rousseau or Voltaire also, right? So our time is the 21st century, and that's a third sense, a third level of time consciousness. Now, the interesting question is, how do these three relate, right? As I already said, I believe the dominant mode is the everyday life. That's where you struggle with synchronization. I have to be there in time because something else starts, or you know, most of us always struggle with a kind of scheduling events. We struggle with a calendar, right? How can we fix a time for a meeting or so? So that's the level of everyday life, and there, in our age at least, time is always scarce. You always have to run fast and struggle for time, right? The second level of time, what I call biographical time, normally only comes to the foreground of our awareness either in rites of passage or times of passage. For example, when you finish school or when your kids or grandkids finish school, right? That's a time when it's not so much the everyday level of time which is in the consciousness, but the question of what do I want to do with my life or with my lifetime, right? And sometimes when you're in crisis, for example, you have your job and you work there, and then you find, well, this is not what I want to do with my life, right? I had some other ideas of how I want to spend my life, right? So this second level, it's a kind of linear perspective of time between birth and death, the biographical time. This comes to the foreground either in rites of passage, for example, also when you're about to retire. Then you start to think not so much about the bus or when the shop closes, but what do I want to do with the rest of my life, the 20 years or so I might still have, right? And the third level, the historical time, this serves as a kind of background structure, right? It's a background structure against which we measure our expectations or the social expectations. So some people might say, my conception of life just doesn't fit our age, right? Doesn't fit my time. I have fallen out of time. I live in a conception which was good for the early 20th century or the 19th century, but not to the 20th century. So we sometimes would call someone anachronistic or ahead of his time, right? Certain poets, for example, we say, or certain scientists, we say, oh, they were ahead of their time. They didn't fit in their age. So that's the background structure. Now, I think it's very important to realize that the good life, right, a vibrant sense of temporality, comes when the three levels are integrated, when one level makes sense in light of the other levels. Right? So what you do on the everyday level, you have your job, but this is what you want to do with your life. It fits your biographical sense of temporality, and you feel that it fits the historical age, the epoch you live in, right? So what we normally need for a healthy sense of temporality and for a good life is an integration of these three temporal horizons. The everyday life, with its struggles and problems, should somehow relate to, fit, be integrated, a biographical perspective of your lifetime, and your sense of what is adequate, what is needed in the temporality of the age. Okay. Now, my main argument is, or the main claim I want to develop now, is that we all have problems. There are increasing problems to integrate these three levels of temporality due to what I call the processes of social acceleration, due to the need to permanently speed up our lives on the one hand, and to permanently reinvent ourselves, be flexible and adaptive on the other hand, right? Okay. So my claim is that there is increasingly a loss of a meaningful connection between the past, the present, and the future. Right? And actually, there are three horizons of past, present, and future. On the everyday level, the past is what I did this morning, right? And the future is what I will do this afternoon or this evening. While on a biographical level, the past is what I did in my youth, and the future is what I will do in my old age. While in historical times, the past is, for example, the time of the Second World War or the 20th century, and the future will be, I don't know, some future highly digitalized age or so, right? And these three horizons of past, present, and future need to be integrated, but I believe there is increasingly, in an increasing amount, there is a disconnection, a disintegration between the past, the present, and the future on all three levels, and this is what creates alienation. Now, before I get to alienation, I'd like to talk at least briefly about the main structure of our society. What is it that causes the problem? And some of you might have read my book on social acceleration. There I try to develop this notion or this sense at great length. My claim is that we live in a society, a modern capitalist society, is characterized by the fact that we permanently need to increase to maintain our institutional structure, and the increase comes through technological acceleration, cultural innovation, and economic growth. But I put all these three together in the notion of social acceleration. And what I mean is, without permanent innovation, without optimization, without speeding up, the society cannot maintain its institutional structure. It cannot maintain what it has. So, for example, if France does not achieve economic growth, you will lose jobs. You will have a lot of unemployed. Companies will close down. And that will create problems for the budget, right? Because the revenues, tax revenues goes down, but expenditure goes up. And that means without growth, acceleration, and innovation, it's not just the economy who gets in trouble, it's also the healthcare system, the pension schemes, right? It's the sciences and the arts, right? You can no longer fund them, you can no longer maintain them. You see this from the trouble we had in Greece recently, but some of it can be felt in the rest of Europe, in France and in Spain and in Italy and elsewhere. That without growth, without permanent innovation, acceleration, optimization, we have a problem to maintain our social system, our institutional status quo. That's what I call dynamic stabilization. If we do not, and basically that means for all of us, for societies writ large, but also for the institutions and for us as individuals, you have to run faster and faster every year just to stay where you are, right? Just to maintain the status quo on an institutional and another level, right? And that leads, so the MCM prime it's an old Marxist formula. It means that economic activity is only upheld, is only undertaken, only works if money, in a way that money is invested into commodities. The first M is money, the second is commodity, and the third is money prime, which means more money. So money is only invested when there's a prospect of creating profits. Right? McDonald's or Fnac or whatever it is, they only invest in a company or in a magazine or in a store or in a restaurant if there is hope that they create more revenues, money prime, than what they invested. So this is the logic of permanent increase, and this leads, it's not just an economic logic, it's the same in the arts and in politics and elsewhere. And this leads to three forms of acceleration. There is permanent technological acceleration, right? It's acceleration mainly in transport. It's not so much about high speed, it's about the average speed of people and things and data and messages and even flows of money. For the last 2.5 centuries, it's really setting the world in motion with cars, with trains, with ships, with planes, but now also digitally, right? Having a permanent motion of ideas, images, data, money, and so on. So that's basically driven by technological acceleration. It's the logic of technological acceleration. But there's also an acceleration of social change. The world does not stay the same. The world around you changes quickly, and you have to run faster and faster to keep pace with it, right? To keep your place in this world. I sometimes use the image of downward escalators, right? It's for all of us. We live a life in which we have to run faster and faster in order not to lose ground against the permanently changing landscape. And therefore, because we are forced and we need to optimize and compete on the one hand and to keep pace with the changes on the other hand, we accelerate the pace of life. We try to get more things done within a day or a week or a month or even a lifetime, right? So we try to increase the number of episodes of action or experience per unit of time. I call this acceleration of the pace of life. So basically what that means is that we approach life in a mode of aggression, right? When you get up in the morning, for example, normally you don't wait until you have slept enough or until the sun comes up or so, but you set your alarm clock, and as soon as the alarm clock rings, more or less, you jump out of bed because you have to make that call, because you have to get this done, because you have to catch the bus, because you have to get to work, and so on. And then you struggle with your to-do list. And the to-do list is, so to speak, is the world approaching you, or you experience the world in the form of your to-do list, which means I need to get this done, I need to get that under control, I need to get rid of this, I have to call that person, and so on, right? It comes on all levels. You have to do some things with your body, some things maybe with your psyche, but also with your family and with your workplace and with your car and with the technology. It's a kind of never-ending flow of challenges which you have to master, to command, to control. Right? So that sets you in a mode of aggression towards the world. But it has the reason for this is that we operate, that the dominant mode of interaction is the mode of competition and the need to optimize, right? You have to get better. Everything about your life is kind of coming in the, we heard just the roundtable on the numerique, right? Everything comes in digital parameters, so you can increase the numbers of steps you take per unit of day, you can kind of optimize your sleep time and the calories you take in, and then everything about your workplace. You can optimize your use of energy, you can optimize your output, and so on. So that's all connected to this, what I call the dominant mode of approaching the world as a mode of aggression. Right? It's aggression in a wide sense. And in this mode, time is always scarce, and it's becoming increasingly scarce. Right? So the main consciousness, whenever time comes to your mind, most often you're short on time, or you feel that someone is wasting your time, it takes too long because the to-do list is still full and you cannot work on it because, for example, you are set in a traffic jam or something like this, right? So the main problem is that the to-do list seems to explode in a society that can only stabilize dynamically. And I already said, this puts you in a state when you are on downward escalators. You're always guilty. Whatever you do today, you might run as fast as you can. When you go to bed, you still haven't done it all, right? You're still guilty of not doing a whole number of things. Okay, and now my claim is that this leads to a state of temporal disintegration, right? I already said that past, present, and future are no longer connected because you struggle, you're like in a deadly race on a hamster wheel, and this hamster wheel is kind of daily routine, and you can no longer see how this makes sense in the conception of a complete life, right? And in a kind of historical conception which might give a sense of progress, that life gets better. I mean, my main claim here is that for 200 centuries, modernity was driven by the idea that parents thought, let's work hard, it's such that our kids can have a better life. Right? That gives you a sense of connection between your past, your time, where you come from, and the future you are going to and your kids are going to. Such a sense, let's work hard for our kids to have a better life, connects what you do on the everyday level in your work life with your life perspective and with the future of your kids and the future of your age. But this sense, exactly this sense is lost today. People say we have to work as hard as possible for our kids not to slide back, right? Not to have less than we have, to stay where we are. So this means we run faster and faster without going anywhere. The sense of a meaningful future is lost, and that creates what I call alienation, right? Basically, you already know what I mean by alienation. Alienation is a distortion in the mode of relating to the world, of being in the world, and also of being in time. Right? It's basically what I just said. Right? You're alienated when you ask yourself, what am I doing here? Right? It might happen to you as you sit here. Right? You might ask yourself, what am I doing here? This is such a strange place, and a crazy German guy and who's not even able to speak in French. That's alienation, right? But if it's only temporary, because it's only one bad talk, it's not so bad. When you ask yourself this question in the context of your life, when you suffer from alienation of this sort in more comprehensive view, then you are kind of alienated from time altogether, right? So alienation is a failure to really appropriate the world and time, right? It's an experience of time, of your temporal existence, in which the world doesn't speak to you. Time thereby seems to be kind of dead, right? It doesn't connect. So it's Rahel Yegi and other philosophers have called alienation a relationship without a true inner relation. It's exactly an experience of frozen time. And by the way, the depression or experiences of burnout are the most extreme cases of this, the paradigm examples of such a form of alienation, because people who are in depression actually talk about frozen time. There is no connection between past and future. Someone said it's like suffocating in time, right? Because there is no draft, no movement from the past into the future. And in such a state of alienation, you have the feeling that you do your work, you have a position in the world, you might even be rich and have a job and a family and many obligations and many capacities, but none of that really speaks to you. Nothing really connects. Nothing really has the power to turn time into a vibrant experience, or a vibrant experience of time. And if you're in such a state, by the way, you experience yourself in the same mode, right? People in depression say, or in alienation, the world out there is so dead, it's so cold, it doesn't speak to me, it doesn't touch me, right? It's silent, gray, cold, dead, and I feel the same way inside myself. I can no longer feel myself. I feel dead and empty and silent inside too, right? So that's the paradigm of depression and burnout, and it's a lack of meaning on the one hand and a lack of power, you could say, on the other hand. So I asked myself, okay, if this is true, right, we live in a society which can only stabilize dynamically, and this creates a kind of creates a world in which people are alienated from time and from their own existence, in a world where there is a disintegration from what they do on a daily level. You know what you have to do. You have to get to your job and catch the bus and so on, but it doesn't make a meaningful horizon. It doesn't open up a meaningful horizon of your lifetime, and it doesn't connect to a narration, to a story of where we go into the future. So what we need, I believe, to get out of this mess, not just individually, but on a social level, on a societal level, what we need is a different concept, is a conception of what the opposite of alienation is, right? What is a non-alienated way of being in time? What is a non-alienated way of integrating the past, the present, and the future on these three levels? And my claim is that we have to, if you recover this sense, you get a sense of what a good life is for you, but I believe we also get a sense on how we should kind of reconstitute society, how we should remake our institutional fabric in order to get into a better and more vibrant future. And this is why I wrote the Resonance book, right? I mean, I had written the Acceleration book, claiming that acceleration leads to alienation, and then people said, okay, but what do we do from here? And I think just slowing down things is not enough. We need a vision of a non-alienated world, and this is what I call a resonant world, or a resonant mode of being in the world. And the mode of resonance is a different way of relating to the world. It's not in the mode of aggression. Right? As I say, as subjects, we approach the world now in our society as a permanent field of aggression. I need to get there. I need to buy this. I want to have that. I want to get rid of this. And resonance is a totally different way of relating to people, places, and even your own body and your own experience. And the main elements of resonance are listening and answering. And listening and answering is not the same as controlling and having, right? So what is resonance? So for example, I said right here, you might be alienated and ask yourselves, what am I doing here? Then that's alienation. It's turned into resonance when there is something that affects you, right? So for me, the first element of resonance is affection. Something speaks to you. Something touches you or moves you. Right? Such an experience is the opposite of frozen time. Then all of a sudden you feel a dynamic relation to the world outside, and therefore through time, so to speak, there is something that speaks to you or touches you. Right? Bruno Latour, the French sociologist, calls this actually hearing a call. Something is calling you, it's touching you. And this is the first moment of feeling alive again, and therefore feeling time move in a meaningful way. But it's not enough to be affected. Right? The second element of resonance is answering to this element of affection, moving outwards. I call it emotion because it comes from emovere, Latin, moving outward, moving towards the thing that calls you. Right? If you feel what this person says is interesting, then you kind of open up. You see a change in the way you sit, in the way you look, in the way you feel. You answer to what you hear. For example, if it's an idea, you immediately start to appropriate it, right? To think it through, to change it, to apply it to your life, for example. And thereby you feel a sense of self-efficacy, of power actually, right? So this is kind of, you know, I said the loss of meaning and the loss of power are the two core moments of alienation. So you see why affection and self-efficacy or emotion are kind of getting you out of alienation, because it means there is kind of something speaking to you, it's giving you meaning, and that you feel you're capable to answer it, to reach out to this other side, gives you a sense of power. And if this small interplay starts, it might not be, it doesn't have to be ideas or a talk. It might be a person sitting next to you or sitting in front or behind you or so, and you feel drawn to him or her, right? And that's a kind of moment of affection. And if you actually get in contact or so, or it might be music you hear, it might be a music you hear somewhere, or even a memory you have, right? So something affects you and you answer it, you reach out to it, you do something with it internally or externally. And then the third element of resonance is it transforms you. When you get in resonance, for example, at this conference, with some person you meet, with some idea you hear, with some of the art performances you see, and you answer it, then you are not the same when you leave the conference than as you were when you entered it, right? Resonance transforms us. And as Latour says, those are the moments, well, worth living for, right? Those are the moments where you feel alive. It's the sense of aliveness comes with a sense of transformation. However, the final element of a resonant relationship is what I call non-engineerability. I know that they translated it into French as indisponibilité. Right? And I've written a new book which actually will also come out in French. I'm quite happy about this in January. Rendre le monde indisponible. I totally like that title. Right? The idea here is that you cannot engineer resonance, you cannot predict it, right? You go to a conference hoping that you will get in resonance with something that happens here, but you don't know if it happens. It might be you are bored all day, and you don't know when it happens and how long it takes. And the other moment of unpredictability or non-engineerability, indisponibility, is that if it happens, something sets you on fire, so to speak. You don't know what the outcome will be, right? You don't know what the result of this element of resonance will be. So you cannot predict the outcome of resonance at all. But if it happens, if you get in resonance, it's very interesting, right? Then you feel time is no longer frozen. Resonance always kind of connects past to future, to past experiences to future expectations. I think that's exactly, I call it the temporal axis of resonance, right? It gives meaning to the past and to the future. So you have an idea with which you somehow reinterpret your past and from which you draw conclusions into the future. And it's not just, you know, some parts of the mindfulness or the meditation movement say you have to be totally in the here and now. I'm a little skeptical about this. I mean, it depends on what you mean, but I think the main part of a resonant experience is that it kind of opens up the temporal horizons. It gives you almost something like a co-presence of the past, the present, and the future. In the Proust paper talk yesterday, there were very good examples of this, right? With Proust in his biographical moments, for example, it's contemporaneous, or whatever that is in French, right? It's the becoming contemporaries of the past and the future. It is almost the past and the future come to life simultaneously, and it's the sense of connection which characterizes interpretations of resonance, right? So my conclusion is, and my final word, and I think I'm just about in time, right? What we need is a critique of the conditions of resonance in our everyday individual lives, but also in our social lives, in our institutional lives, right? Where does this life create alienated forms of being in time, puts us in a mode of aggression towards the world? And what would we need to do to recover the sense of resonance, of vibrant time again? And I believe we can start in our own lives, right? In our interactions with the family, at our workplace, whatever that work is. There are always small rooms for maneuver, right? Small rooms for trying to resonate, get in resonance with your colleagues, with your clients, with the people you work at, even with the materials we are connected to, right? And from this, I hope, we get also the tools and the sense and the power to fight off this dominant logic of dynamic stabilization, which creates not just acceleration, but alienation in quite frightening proportions. That's what I wanted to tell you today, and I'm very much looking forward to any questions you might have. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you. Okay.
Vous avez eu une performance de la phénoménologie dramatique du temps. Donc on est très loin du temps considéré comme un espace. On est dans une relation de résonance, je dis bien dramatique, avec le stress, qui est notre rapport au monde, dans un monde où le temps social de base, comme disait Marcel Mauss, est en pleine accélération. Maintenant, cette sorte de phénoménologie du temps, where is my star? You are here. Cette phénoménologie du temps, si je peux risquer cette expression, et on pourrait imaginer une phénoménologie de l'espace dans la perception, bien sûr, on ne peut pas l'imaginer, elle a été écrite, mais nous n'avions pas encore une phénoménologie du temps vécu, du temps perçu, qui est le thème sur lequel Hartmut Rosa s'est présenté ici. Maintenant, je ne veux pas faire une synthèse plus compliquée que ça. L'anglais, je pense, de Hartmut Rosa a été magnifiquement compréhensible et j'espère que nous avons quelques questions, soit pour ajouter au drame, ou soit pour espérer pouvoir gérer ce temps accéléré. Alors, les questions, s'il y en a.
First, I'd like to thank you very much for your very nice talk. I will try to make I have first a remark about this disruption of time. I think it's even emphasized since you've written your book by these collapse theories. So we have to struggle with the to-do list. We feel guilty for not completing it. But we also feel guilty because the horizon is a collapsing world, so what's the use in working anyway? So that's just a remark. My question is, I think part of the reason that we're alienated in time is that with the birth of modernity, the way we conceive time has changed a lot, and it has come to first been thought of something that's completely independent of us with the tick-tack of the clock, And now it's materialized in something that is completely independent of us, with the clocks that are always on time, thanks to synchronization through the internet and the whole infrastructure. So I see how on a personal level we can try and be in resonance with the world. How, or do you have an idea of how, in a more global way for the society, can we find a way to help out to reach this resonance if we still have these clocks that tick?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for this question. I think you're completely right. I mean, part of the situation we are in is a consequence of kind of turning to abstract time, which has no connection even to place, right? Because it's a kind of a universal world time, and of course that's very different from a time that's connected to the qualities of the place you live in, and where what you could call time based on the events you're doing, event time, right? But I'm still quite optimistic that we can do something about it, because I believe resonance, what I call it, right, a resonant mode of being in the world, is not something that is very sophisticated, that we have to learn and that we could completely forget, because I believe human beings by their very nature, right, more than being language animals or reasonable animals or even possessive beings who want to have things, we are resonant beings. You do not become a human subject, a person, if without getting in resonance with your mother or your father or the people who care for you, right? When you look at small babies, it's really their sense of it, with everything they have, with their voice, with their eyes, with their hands and feet, they try to get in resonance with other people, for example. And then some doctors told me, yes, and even when we are very old and lose our capacity to speak and to reason, to language, we are still resonant beings. And that's why I think we do have this sense of a different mode of being in time. That is why we feel alienated, right? This is why we feel it's not right to totally give over to this incredible system. And I believe, you know, the aggression which is in the world, you see it in the political level, but there's now a number of books who permanently talk about the fury almost, right? The anger, the hatred, the aggression in the world. I believe this is a frustration that does not come, at least not only from economic deprivation, it comes from our sense that we don't get from life what life kind of promised us. And that's why I believe there is the power to resistance, and you see it on a worldwide scale. People in China and in South Korea and in Latin and in America, they have the same problems, ecological problems and burnout problems. And that's why I'm quite optimistic that we somehow will become able to regain our sense of a different form of temporality.
I'm working on the trail running activities, the running event, and I'd like to understand why the people are running and running fast outdoor. And I would like to understand why we can run and at the same time feel the vibration.
Yeah, you mean, that's very interesting, right? People like running marathons and so.
Yes, but outside.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
outdoor.
I think the fact that they like to do it, but this is very interesting, right? I mean, I mean, on the one hand, it's very obvious that running is a kind of part of the logic of acceleration, because people like to run, you know, the clock is very important. They like to run faster than last time, or longer ways or so. So it almost seems like a mode of aggression. And when they run inside in the gym, it's actually a kind of making what I call hyper-accelerated standstill, right? You run fast without moving. But you're right, a lot of people like to run outside, like jogging, right? Or even there are rock climbers who try to be as fast as possible up the rocks. And I think this is a very strange mixture. It's really kind of, I think it's what they do there is bringing together these diverging logics I described, right? On the one hand, it's almost the mode of aggression, right? Being the first on top or so. It's running, struggling with yourselves and the clock. And on the other hand, maybe it is our form of trying to get in touch, in resonance with our body, with the landscape again, right? So it might be that the explanation, the answer to your question is that because we are so trained, so used to this mode of aggression, we kind of need it to regain the sense of resonance. That's a bit like people who sometimes say, you know, they can relax, calm down through watching a thriller, right, or listening to heavy metal music, right? It's trying to gain the one through the other, trying to get in resonance through acceleration. That would be my explanation, but I find it very interesting, these phenomena, particularly when it comes to like running the marathon, right? Because this is a very harsh thing to do to yourself, right? I mean, it's almost like inflicting pain on yourselves, but nevertheless, people do it, and sometimes they even get in resonance. It's their way of feeling their body again, getting in contact with their own existence. And I don't know what I did with this thing.
Est-ce qu'il y a encore une question? Ce serait la dernière. Non, on ne peut plus prendre de questions. Les prochaines questions seront en intimité temporelle avec Hartmut Rosa.